Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Hey man, can I copy your homework?
Huh?
Can I copy your homework?
No, you can't copy my homework! Darius, bitches!
Alright, before even jumping into this video, we gotta settle one thing, because I know people will bring it up in the comments otherwise. I will call the game Pokémon Legends Arceus, according to the English pronunciation shown in the official Nintendo YouTube video.
Pokémon Legends Arceus.
However, I am fully aware that in the Japanese pronunciation, it is
Pokémon Legends Arceus.
But since I'm not Japanese, and this is not a Japanese video,
Get those Japanese words off of me.
glad we got this out of the way. On the 27th of February 2024, in the Pokémon Presents, Game Freak revealed their newest Pokémon title, currently in development and set to release in 2025, titled Pokémon Legends ZA? Legends Z2A? Legends ZA? Legends Zaza? Legends... And since I always wanted to make a review video on Pokémon Legends Arceus, what better time to go back and revisit the game and point out its positives, negatives, and what made the game so unique as an official Pokémon title developed by Game Freak. This way, we can reflect if we should be hopeful or scared for the upcoming second title in the Legends series. So, let's review Pokémon Legends Arceus. By the time of recording this video, Legends Arceus is not the latest title of the Pokémon company. In fact, it has been out for 2 years already. In 2022, the 9th generation in the Pokémon mainline series titled Pokémon Scarlet and Violet was released worldwide on the 18th of November. Now, this is not a review about these games, but it is important to keep in mind what followed Legends Arceus, even if some of it is unpleasant. Scarlet and Violet also received 2 DLCs, one in September 2023 and the other one in December of 2023, which will also be considered for the sake of this video. With all this out of the way, it is time to talk about the main focus of this video, namely Pokémon Legends Arceus, and with it the first entry into the Legends series. In Pokémon Legends Arceus, you start the game by first meeting not the professor, not your mother, but God itself, after giving it all your personal information, like your name and
your credit card, the 3 digits on the back, the expiration month and year, but you gotta be quick.
It touches your phone and isekais you so hard, you lose all your memories in the process. After finally waking up in an unfamiliar environment, you are greeted by 3 familiar-looking Pokémon, and 1 not-so-familiar-looking man, who introduces himself as Professor Laventon, the Pokémon professor of this game. Puzzled by your arrival, the professor runs off to catch his 3 escaped Pokémon, and you suddenly start to feel the withdrawal of your phone addiction kicking in. Let's not pretend this wouldn't be any of us. You go and pick up your smartphone that has been upgraded to iOS 2 billion and notice that it is now possessed by the Pokémon god Arceus itself, assigning you with the simple task of catching every single Pokémon in the region. You don't know why and you don't know how, but someone will eventually explain it. Right?
Are you sure about that?
Despite having no memories, you somehow only remember how to enslave. Catch Pokemon. So that is what you do. You catch the professor's Pokemon for him, after which both of you join forces as you become his research assistant. Your goal? To catch all Pokemon and work for the survey corps of his town. His goal? To create this region's very first Pokédex with your help. He takes you to Jubilife Village, a bustling town founded by the Galaxy Expedition team, filled with people who are scared of Pokemon, because as every second person in this world tells you, Pokemon are very dangerous creatures. Totally understandable. Have you looked at these vicious monsters? To arrange for you to live in the village, Professor Laventon runs to the Galaxy Center Hall to talk to the lead captain, Silene, who looks very much familiar. After having dealt with first-degree xenophobia at the local restaurant, you meet your rival in this game, called Akari or Ray, depending on which protag you are playing as. She's also one of Professor Laventon's assistants and part of the Galaxy Expedition team, or more specifically, the Survey Corps. Their work lies in exploring the Hisui region and gathering information on Pokémon to help create the Pokédex. So a perfect fit for your profile. Captain Silene proposes a trade offer. You help the Survey Corps catch Pokémon and they agree to house and feed you. However, you first have to prove yourself worthy of even joining them by completing a trial. Your test consists of catching 3 bloodthirsty, brutal and vicious Pokémon feared by all of mankind. A Bidoof, a Starly and a Shinx. High on life and good food, you go to your new home provided by the Galaxy Foundation and get some good night's sleep before the big day of your trial. Yet it seems like you cannot even catch a 5-minute break as a massive lightning bolt strikes a nearby forest. This is probably not relevant to the story and needs no investigation at all. In the morning, Akari picks you up and both of you head to the Galaxy Center Hall to meet up with both Silene and the Professor. For your entry trial, the captain provides you with a pouch for your Pokeballs and Laventon offers you one of his 3 Pokemon as partner for your trial. In my first playthrough, I picked Oshawott, but for the sake of recording footage for this review, I went with Rowlet. Now, you're finally ready to head to the trial site, just outside of Jubilife Village, and nothing is standing in your way. Oh yeah, except this totally random merchant dude who does not bear any resemblance to any iconic champion, still haunting our dreams at night. Showing him what legends are made of, you make your way to the Obsidian Fieldlands at long last. Now, judging by what everyone in town thinks, catching Pokemon in this game is going to be hard. You have to undergo years of training and hard work to pull off such a feat. Oh what? You're already done? Well, never mind then. With the caught Pokemon in your bag, you head back to Silene and show her that you got what it takes to join the Survey Corps. As token of your achievement, you receive the Galaxy Survey Corps uniform, and with it, you are now a member of their team. Last but not least, you are also being gifted a hat to cover your early male pattern baldness at age 15. And visit Kamado, the leader of the Survey Corps and Galaxy team. To measure your strength as a Pokemon trainer, you now have to face him in combat, for which he tries to sumo toss you, to which you just... Don't know what this contributes to the story, but alas, with this, you finally made it. You are officially part of the Survey Corps and subsequently of Jubilife Village. Now, you are ready to catch all the Pokemon of this region, to fill this godforsaken Pokédex and meet God to hopefully get some answers to why you have been sent to this world. And with this, it is finally time to talk about the gameplay. Pokémon Legends Arceus introduces a new twist to the original formula we were used to in previous Pokémon games. In a nutshell, this game is a mix of the original Pokémon formula, but sprinkled in with a bit of that Breath of the Wild magic. Does that mean every bit has changed from the ground up? No. A lot of elements remain the same, like the turn-based battle system, character customization, the Pokémon leveling system, and so on. However, there are various big features that were introduced or received a complete overhaul. Let's start with the most obvious one. Pokémon wouldn't be Pokémon if it wasn't for catching all the little creatures. In this game, the catching mechanic has been redone from the ground up and clearly separates itself from any previous Pokémon game. Legends Arceus features 2 methods of catching Pokémon. The first one is catching a Pokémon while in a battle, which is basically what we were used to from previous Pokémon games. The basic rule here is lowering the wild Pokémon's health, maybe toss a status condition on top of it, throw a Pokéball, and bada bing, bada boom, you got yourself a new Pokemon. The second and new catching method happens without engaging in a battle and just by trying and catching the Pokemon in the overworld in real time. In other words, just throw your Pokeball straight at the Pokemon to catch it. What makes this approach even nicer is that you have a variety of items at your disposal to make catching easier. Additionally, items are helpful as the Pokemon in this game belong to the following 3 categories: friendly, skittish, or hostile. As the name suggests, Pokemon of the friendly category do not run away when you approach them. Skittish Pokemon do the opposite and run away the moment they spot you. And hostile Pokemon start to attack you when spotting you. So catching each Pokemon becomes way more intuitive as you have to figure out what category the Pokemon you plan to catch belongs to and how it will behave when planning to catch it. For some Pokemon, it is easier to first engage in a battle, whereas for others, they can be caught by hiding in tall grass and tossing as many Pokeballs as humanly possible. As mentioned, this time you you also have items that you find and craft throughout the game, making the process of catching Pokemon even more enjoyable. For instance, outside of just throwing Pokeballs until you finally catch it, you also have berries that you can use to lure or distract a Pokemon with, stun items, which are especially useful to catch aggressive or skittish Pokemon even without engaging in a battle, smoke bombs to hide from Pokemon, and many more. Outside of the items you use to catch a Pokemon, you also have the option to duck and sneak to hide in tall grass. Additionally, you can also dash and perform dodge rolls, which are useful when facing aggressive Pokemon or when trying to quickly hide from skittish Pokemon. Also, when throwing a Pokeball at a Pokemon from behind, it produces one of the most satisfying sounds. Just listen to this. Bro, when I hear this, I just wanna... All of this makes catching Pokemon the most fun it has ever been for me, and actually exciting to complete the entire Pokédex. There's also a new kind of Pokemon featured in this game called Alpha Pokemon. These Pokemon are much bigger, extremely hostile, and characterized by their glowing red eyes and massive size compared to their regular counterparts. For each Pokemon in the game, there also exists an Alpha version, so even the smallest Bidoof can be found as a chunky behemoth. Catching an Alpha Pokemon is always an option, even in the beginning area of the game, but requires a substantial amount of patience and balls.
What?
When fighting an Alpha Pokemon though, you soon realize that they are much stronger and therefore also give more EXP when caught or defeated. Catching an Alpha Pokemon is typically more difficult, as they withstand more stun items, startle you with one of their cries, and relentlessly attack you on sight. The cool thing though is that even after finally catching an Alpha Pokemon, they maintain their bigger form as well as their deep cries, but they lose their glowing red eyes. Finally, they also introduced a special event in the game, where a space-time distortion randomly appears for a set amount of time, in which you can collect rare items spawning out of the rift, as well as catch rare Pokemon that are typically not found within the Hisui region.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Doesn't that make some of these Pokemon paradox Pokemon? Like the ones in Scarlet and Violet? Nah, probably better not to read too much into this. This is not the first Pokemon game that features an open world approach. We have seen it being done first in Pokemon Sword and Shield in the form of the wild areas, and of course also in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet with its true open world. Pokemon Legends Arceus adds a different twist to it, as it doesn't feature an open world, but rather a world with open areas. Let me explain. Just like in the wild areas in Pokemon Sword and Shield, you can roam around each area freely. However, this time you have more possibilities to traverse inside them. When progressing through the game, you will receive a mountable Pokemon in each area that is adapted to the surrounding of that area to facilitate its traversing. The mountable Pokemon you receive range from Pokemon that make traversing faster to Pokemon that enable you to swim, climb, or fly around. The progression of the game very nicely combines the map design with the methods of traversing. The entire game isn't open world in the sense that you can traverse throughout the Hisui region freely, but it has an open world approach to each separate area. This is nothing new, as it is reminiscent to games like Xenoblade Chronicles or even Zelda Twilight Princess. The good thing in Legends Arceus is that it isn't restricted to just a wild area like in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Ultimately, this is how the world is structured, and I don't mind that it isn't a true open world, since we saw how well that worked out in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet on a technical level. It also doesn't feel as empty as the wild areas in Pokemon Sword and Shield, as Pokemon roam around freely. In Legends Arceus, it feels nice to get involved with the world and discover new places that weren't reachable on the first visit, and subsequently find new Pokemon, items, or other things. Alright, enough about exploration and traversing, let's talk about Pokemon battles in Legends Arceus. The Pokemon battles in this game still follow the traditional formula, but with a new twist. In Legends Arceus, the Pokemon battles with both wild Pokemon or trainers are still turn-based. In other words, you don't attack other Pokemon in real time, like in Pokemon Tekken or even the Buddy mode in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Instead, you and your opponent take turns attacking each other. However, this game applies more of a RPG approach to the turn-based battles. In other words, just like in turn-based JRPG games like Final Fantasy accuracy, you see your attacking order in the upper
right-hand corner.
The attack priority depends on another change they introduce in this game, namely the move mastery. In Legends Arceus, attacks can either be performed normally, as in previous games, or they are performed following the strong style or agile style. On one hand, when performing a move in the agile style, it will be less powerful, but instead it increases the Pokemon's action speed. This allows the Pokemon to execute another action sooner. On the other hand, when performing a move in the strong style, it will be more powerful with a higher accuracy. However, the user's action speed will be decreased. In other words, the opponent Pokemon will have 2 turns before your next action. Additionally, using either of the move mastery will cost the user 2 power points, or PP, instead of the regular 1 PP. While the move mastery mechanic plays less of a role when battling one wild Pokemon, as these fights usually don't last as long, they become more important when facing stronger opponents, like Alpha Pokemon. Moreover, in Legends Arceus, it is also possible to fight multiple Pokemon at the same time. And lastly, Alpha Pokemon, as well as strong Pokemon you face from trainers, will also be able to use strong or agile style moves. Naturally, for those situations, the action speed system plays a bigger role, and with it, there's another layer to strategize how to deal with stronger or numerous Pokemon. Another aspect in Legends Arceus worth pointing out is how wild Pokemon battles are initiated. Contrary to other Pokemon games prior to this one, you don't have to sit through an encounter transition from the overworld into the battle scene. Naturally, this omits the encounter animation of the Pokemon and your trainer sending out their Pokemon. While being a charming homage to older Pokemon titles, the animations have become very redundant in recent 3D Pokemon games, especially in those where they drag out for a significant amount of time. For those of you who have played Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In Legends Arceus, there are no transitions when engaging in a fight with a wild Pokemon, as they happen in the overworld. Luckily, it seems that this has become the new standard for Pokemon games, as it was also present in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Additionally, during battles in Legends Arceus, you are still able to move around freely with your trainer, even when Pokemon attack. This is especially helpful when fighting a Pokemon that is too strong, and instead of choosing to run away from the fight in the battle menu, you can literally just run away with your trainer. As such, it is a very enjoyable change, as the battles feel less isolated and constrained. Pokemon Legends Arceus also features trainer fights. However, most are linked to the plot or part of the post-game, so unlike other Pokemon games, you will not roam around and battle random trainers. In this sense, the whole idea of walking in front of a trainer who notices you with a big exclamation mark over their head is gone, just like in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Well, mostly with a few exceptions. Fighting trainers in this game is pretty much like fighting a trainer in any other Pokemon game. Yet in Legends Arceus, you still have the option to use the agile or strong style moves. This makes strategizing a bit more compelling. Yet throughout my playthrough, I never struggled with any of the Pokemon trainer battles. Well, with a few notable exceptions. We already briefly talked about items that you can use in the game. However, an exciting feature in Legends Arceus is that most items can be crafted. This means that throughout each area you can find and receive a plethora of items that you can then use for crafting specific other items useful for fighting or catching Pokemon, like Pokeballs, potions, smoke bombs, and so on. By progressing through the game, you'll receive further recipes to craft gradually better items. I believe that these recipes also serve as ideal rewards for completing each area and subsequently then be used to catch or defeat stronger Pokemon. Just as a side note though, catching a Pokemon is still very much luck-based as in previous Pokemon games. More specifically, even when using a Great Ball instead of a Pokeball doesn't guarantee a catch. However, there is a bit of skill that can make catching easier with the items that you can craft in this game. You can now stun Pokemon with an item to increase their catch rate or strike them with a Pokeball from the back. With all the exciting new features aside, let's talk about the dumb fan in the room. Since this is a review or retrospective video, we need to also address all the major shortcomings of this game. So let's rip the band-aid off as quickly as possible. Just a heads up though, all the shortcomings I will talk about are very much subjective and you are of course free to disagree. Let's start with the first major flaw of Pokemon Legends Arceus, the graphics. In short,
It looks like trash.
Okay, let's be real now. The game clearly does not look as good as other other Nintendo Switch games, like Xenoblade Chronicles or Zelda Breath of the Wild. Heck, most of the times, it doesn't even look as good as other games of the same franchise on the Nintendo Switch, like Pokémon Let's Go. God, look how clean this still looks. I'm personally someone who doesn't really care much about the graphics. As long as the game is fun to play, it runs well enough, the story is compelling, or it has a unique art style. But this is a review, and it needs to be addressed as objectively as possible, even if my preference for art style and graphics is very subjective. The graphics don't look great, but they also don't look the worst we've seen in a Pokémon game. When traversing the world, you will discover some very noticeable pop-ins, not only of Pokémon or people, but of entire mountains as well. Also, Pokémon that you see in the distance will suffer a much lower FPS count. In other words, compared to the Pokémon closer to the trainer, their movements will stutter and not look as fluent. In a way, this is understandable as the game features a great number of Pokémon roaming around, but not excusable as other games like Xenoblade Chronicles manage to do the same thing, while also having overworld fights on the same system. Luckily, it isn't as bad as the FPS disaster in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, for what it's worth. It is also worth mentioning how devoid of life the towns feel overall. Game Freak managed to create a Pokémon game that feels more alive than ever when exploring the world, yet created some of the most lifeless towns in the franchise. I hope this is not a bad foreshadowing to Legends ZA, where the game entirely takes place in Lumiose City. In one of the first trailers for Legends Arceus, Jubilife Village is even described as a bustling place.
A certain village bustled with the comings and goings of people.
No, this is a bustling town. The problem here is that the inhabitants of the towns have no cycle in their actions, and except for the small changes that happen throughout the story, there's no variety to any of them. It would have been nice to see people walk around or interact with each other, and especially with their Pokémon. Unfortunately, you won't find any of this in this game. One other thing Game Freak does so well, they basically graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree, is the fading to black moments. Every time a slide animation would be required, you are presented with a black screen featuring subtitles, because, you know, no voice acting. I'm sorry, but for a game company and the franchise with their revenue, this just screams laziness. Smaller studios manage to animate trivial actions. Even if it doesn't look perfect, at least it is being done. Game Freak deliberately leaving them out shows a clear lack of interest or time. Probably not due to any lack of skill, because the cutscenes in Legends Arceus, or also Scarlet and Violet, look very well animated. At the end of the day, we can only speculate the reasoning behind their choices. But it is a shame nonetheless, and fading to black moments suck. Ultimately, while Pokémon Legends Arceus doesn't look anywhere as good as games like Zelda Breath of the Wild or Xenoblade Chronicles 3 on a graphical level, it definitely doesn't look bad. The game has some pretty moments, and I'm still sometimes surprised to see how beautiful some areas are. Personally, with its art style and technical level, I prefer Pokémon Legends Arceus over Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, as the latter falls apart with immersion-breaking technical issues. But this is of course very subjective, and I've seen discourse online of people either preferring Legends Arceus or Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Nonetheless, it still doesn't excuse in what a poor state both games were released, and also no effort was made to fix any of them even after their release. In a perfect world, Pokémon Legends Arceus would have benefited greatly from aesthetic features like leaves flowing in the wind, people in towns having proper and more lively animation cycles, or less texture repetitions. However, I still think this was a step in the right direction, and despite all the visual caveats, this game still delivers a somewhat lively world filled with Pokémon that we all longed for so many years, at least to me. Let's talk a bit about the overarching story without going into any spoilers. Pokémon games are never entirely story focused, nor are they known for amazing stories.
Are you serious?
Except Pokémon Black and White, of course, and the ending of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Yet the overall story in this game felt like a step up from the stories of the past few Pokémon games. Bro, if I hear another vanilla villain starting to throw hands because of an energy crisis in 1,000 years or some other bull, I'm going to lose it. The story story started off quite promising at first, but unfortunately falls rather flat the further you progress the game. Yet, some aspects of the story even reminded me of past Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, which felt very nice. I just wish they would have treated it the same way and gave it as much emotional depth by the end. Sadly, the story of Pokémon Legends Arceus screams time management issues by the time you reach the end. Instead of receiving answers to questions I had throughout the game, like why we got sent into the past, or why we had to complete the Pokédex in the first place, I just ended up with more questions. This left me feeling quite dissatisfied when finishing the game. However, it is worth pointing out that the main story of the game was far more compelling, with great characters, great areas, and great Pokemon battles that left me still satisfied. As with plenty of the recent Pokemon titles, this game could have had a better and more fulfilling story if they just gave it more time and thought. Of course, this doesn't mean this game has the worst story as well. Especially the post-game had some nice surprises, and I'm glad that Game Freak touched on more mature and real topics in this game, like for instance, death. Lastly, we need to talk about probably the most controversial topic among the Pokemon community, and that is voice acting. I already know that plenty of the people watching this video will disagree with my opinion on this topic, but I believe 3D Pokemon games need voice acting. However, not for everything. Before explaining what I mean by this, let's look back on why I think voice acting should be in modern 3D Pokemon games. Strap in, this will be a long one. In 1996, the first Pokemon game was released on the Nintendo Game Boy with Pokemon Red and Green. Due to technical limitations at the time, almost no games for the system included voice acting. When a Pokemon title was first released fully in 3D with Pokemon Stadium for the Nintendo 64, it featured voice acting for the first time in the form of the announcer for each battle. While limited, the voice acting was used to comment on the attacks of the Pokemon as well as on the conditions and the progress of the battle. This was something most players would know from the anime when watching Ash fight against his opponents in arena settings like in Pokemon gyms or in the Pokemon League. This feature was not included in the following 3D side games, namely Pokemon Colosseum, which was released in 2003, and Pokemon XD, which was released in 2005. This feature would only come back in 2009 when Pokemon Battle Revolution released for the Wii. However, the mainline Pokemon series would continue to not feature any voice acting. This was less of a problem though, as the early installments in the franchise consisted of 2D pixel games. Just like with the lack of animations in these games, the players had to fill in these gaps with their imagination. I still fondly remember how I imagined my Pokemon to battle, or how epic certain parts of the stories felt, despite them looking like this. However, the more the Pokemon games turned 3D, the less of a role the imagination played to fill in these gaps. What I mean by that is that characters and Pokemon animations were now present, well, to some degree, and everything that wasn't started to feel out of place to the player.
What the
In 1970, the Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori coined the term uncanny valley, describing that the closer robots appear to humans, the more our sense of their familiarity increases to the point where it makes us feel uneasy. This theory also applies to how virtual characters in video games appear and how players react to them, especially when talking about 3D games. I would say that the uncanny valley theory also applies specifically to character actions and movements in 3D games. This is the reason why the lack of character animations look more out of place in a 3D game rather than in a 2D game, because you base it more on real life rather than your imagination. In 2013, Game Freak released their first fully 3D mainline Pokemon games with Pokemon X and Y. When playing these games, some players were disappointed with the lack of animations and voice acting that subsequently made the events, actions, and characters more uncanny. Now that these games are 3D, there's less room for what our imagination can compensate compared to what we're used to in pixel games. Over the next years, some players were hoping for voice acting to be included in the following Pokemon games. The glimmer of hope for many hopeful people was the moment the mainline Pokemon games would transition from being primarily handheld games to console games. And in 2019, the 8th generation of Pokemon games was released with the titles Pokemon Sword and Shield for the Nintendo Switch, again with the stale animation and no voice acting. With this release, plenty of players expressed their disappointment regarding the lack of voice acting. This couldn't be blamed on the technical limitations anymore, as the mainline games had finally reached the consoles. As such, in an interview with Metro in 2019, director Shigeru Omori was asked why voice acting was deliberately not included in these games. Omori explains, There's sort of two main reasons. So firstly, this is an RPG with a whole lot of text that we've then localizing and releasing in 9 different languages at the same time. So from a purely practical point of view, actually getting that organized and carrying out all of the voice recordings, the corrections and so on in 9 different languages for release on exactly the same day is something that could be incredibly difficult. So that's one reason why we haven't chosen to do it this time around. But the other reason is one of character image, in the sense of when you play a game, if you've got a voice on that character that instantly provides to the player an image, a feel for that character that they don't generate themselves, it's pushed on them from the development side. Whereas if we have really flavorful text for those characters but no voice, the player can kind of create their own image of who that character is as they're playing. And that's something we really like to encourage as we're creating games. To summarize, his 2 reasons for the absence of voice acting are as follows. First, it would require too much effort to voice the lines for the characters in each of the 9 languages that the games are localized in. Second, the inclusion of voice acting would destroy the image the player would otherwise create in their mind of the characters. In my opinion, these reasons hold absolutely no ground. For the first explanation, plenty of games that receive dubbing usually don't do it in the same languages that the games are localized in. There are plenty of games that are popular globally but then only receive voice acting in Japanese, either because the games are produced in Japan or because the franchise of the game originate from Japan. A good example for this is Digimon Cyber Sleuth or every One Piece game. Then there are also plenty of games that are popular globally and are also voiced in Japanese but also in English to mostly satisfy their global audience. And in very rare cases, there are exceptional games that include voice acting in the same languages its text was localized in, like Zelda Breath of the Wild. Therefore, it can be said that if Game Freak really wanted to include voice acting in their games, they would have found a way that would both satisfy their fans and also pose the least inconvenience during production. For the second explanation, if they truly want to preserve the image the players generate of the characters by not including voice acting in their games, then why are most of their characters voiced in the anime? Even more, why are the same characters also voiced in one of their other games, like Pokémon Masters EX? Granted, this is a mobile game and not a mainline game, but wouldn't that be even more of a reason to also have voice acting in their main games and not only in a mobile spin-off game? On top of that, this game also includes both a Japanese
Bonjour! 俺はグリーン。パシオでチャンピオンになる男さ。
and an English dub.
Bonjour! The name's Blue. Feast your eyes on the future PML champion!
And players love it. Naturally, both reasonings are very subjective. However, I believe that the real reason why no voice acting is included in their mainline games is tied to the lack of time, but also to that of a potential financial loss. Pokemon games are nowadays known for releasing half-baked with a production time that is too short. This is especially visible in their technical and graphical states. Having to squeeze in the recording of voice acting in this small production window, even only in one language, is almost impossible. Moreover, Pokemon games sell insanely well. By the end of 2023, Pokemon Sword and Shield sold 26.17 million copies. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold 24.36 million copies. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee sold 15.07 million copies. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl sold 15.06 million copies. And Pokemon Legends Arceus sold 14.83 million copies. They all list among the top 15 games sold for the Nintendo Switch, and none of them included voice acting. With a grand total of 95.5 million in copies at the end of 2023 with their games on the Nintendo Switch, even without including any voice acting, they would most likely lose more money in the production of the games compared to the potential increase in profit if they do. With all this in mind, what sort of voice acting do I wish to be in a Pokemon game? And especially what kind of voice acting would I have liked to see in Legends Arceus? First, the mainline Pokemon games should be dubbed in both Japanese and English. Just as it is the case with Pokemon Masters EX, this would satisfy both the Japanese and the global fans. Second, I believe that not every text on screen should be dubbed, especially when that text is oftentimes unskippable. I'm looking at you, Genshin Impact. However, cinematic pre-rendered cutscenes should most definitely be dubbed. These scenes usually carry the most relevance as they are also part of the key moments in the story and also feature the best animation within the game. While it would have been nice to see these being voiced in Legends Arceus, the lack of it in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet showed even more how much was truly missing. In hindsight, some scenes are really tough to watch without feeling uncomfortable due to the lack of voice acting. I mean, take this shot from Legends Arceus for example. And this one from the latest game Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Third, the perfect amount of voice acting in a Pokémon game, in my opinion, would be similar to how it is handled in both Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In these games, cinematic cutscenes are fully voiced. Every other dialogue in the game is simply accompanied by short grunts and noises the people make when you talk to them. While it is nothing you would expect when actually talking to someone in real life, it still breathes life into every character. A plus point as well in production is that these are usually universally the same across other languages in the game. I firmly believe that deciding that characters are not dubbed in Pokémon just so players can keep the feel that they have generated of their character in the head completely undermines the point of voice acting. Isn't the main goal of voice acting to specifically breathe life into characters? I'm aware that some people firmly are against the inclusion of voice acting in the mainline Pokémon games, but I'm happy to see that especially after playing Pokémon Legends Arceus or Scarlet and Violet, the majority of players express their wishes and an overall need for voice acting in Pokémon games. Last, I believe to satisfy all players, they could include voice acting in Japanese and English, but also include an option to mute the dialogue in the game for people who don't like it at all. I've been hoping for voice acting in Pokémon games for years, especially since they released for the Nintendo Switch, but I have to say that my hopes have run dry. But hey, maybe we'll get surprised in the future, who knows? Alright, enough yapping about the bad stuff. I wouldn't make this video if I wasn't really happy with this game. So let's also talk about some of the best features in this game. It goes without saying that catching Pokemon in this game and completing the Pokédex has never been this much fun. Heck, I even did a living dex in this game, just to have another purpose of playing longer. Of course, only crazy people would try to complete a shiny living dex, which is also exactly why I'm doing this right now, even 2 years after its release. Anyways, roaming around the world, discovering each Pokemon, strategizing how to best catch them, and then registering each Pokemon has been an absolute blast, and I already dread the next time Game Freak is going to release another Pokemon game where this catching mechanic isn't the new standard. This alone has made this Pokemon game one of the best in the entire franchise for me. We cannot talk about fun while catching Pokemon without mentioning one of the best features of this game. Are you aware of the Pavlovian conditioning? Bear with me here, this will make a lot of sense in a minute. During the 1890s, the physiologist Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was researching the salivation in dogs in response to being fed. He predicted that dogs would salivate when having food in front of them. However, he then noticed that his dog would already salivate just when hearing the footsteps of the assistant bringing the dog food. He concluded that dogs created connections between their food and objects or events. In other words, their behavior emerged through the association between different stimuli. With this discovery, the Pavlovian conditioning was first introduced, which led to the more famously known Pavlov's dog experiment in 1902. With his newly gained knowledge, Pavlov created an experiment to prove that dogs could be conditioned to salivate even just at the sound of a bell when hearing it repeatedly over a period of time before being fed. Now, I already hear some of you yelling at your screen asking, what the f does this have to do with Pokemon? For those of you who have played this game for plenty of hours, or at least those of you who have just finished the side quest titled A Peculiar Ponyta, I want you to close your eyes and listen to the following sound. Where is it? I'm not crazy, you heard it too, right? For those of you who are not familiar, this is the sound that plays when finding a shiny Pokemon in Legends Arceus. If you are somewhat like me, then this sound already is capable of making you a tad bit excited. In this case, we are the dog, the food is the shiny Pokemon, and the sparkling sound is the sound of the bell in the Pavlov dog experiment. I told you it would make perfect sense. Man, oh man, was I invested in shiny Pokemon in this game. There's just no better feeling when playing a Pokemon game and hearing this sound while exploring the region. Personally, this is the most exciting finding a shiny Pokemon has ever felt in the entire franchise. And it even feels better than how it did in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where the shiny Pokemon would show sparkling stars in the overworld. In Legends Arceus, hearing the sound of a shiny Pokemon as well as seeing the little stars pop up is enough to get my blood pumping. I'm positive that this sound alone is the best representation of pure and raw happiness when playing a Pokemon game. There's just nothing quite like it. On top of that, I almost suffered cardiac arrest the moment I found a shiny Alpha for the first time. For me, it is just the most exciting feature in any Pokemon game and made roaming around the world even after completing the Pokédex still worthwhile. Heck, even to this day, I'm still playing the game occasionally just to progress with my shiny living dex a bit. Naturally, you can imagine my disappointment when discovering that none of this returned in the latest games, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. In these games, shiny Pokémon are not being indicated in the overworld other than with their colors. However, some of them are so small that when finishing the game, I have a full-on existential crisis wondering how many shiny Pokemon I have missed throughout the game. Have I also mentioned that I'm colorblind? This is so evil, man. Why would they do it like that? Especially after the godlike experience in Legends Arceus. Anyway, this is not a rant video for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Over the course of the main story in the game, you are faced with the noble Pokemon of each region. Without spoiling too much, noble Pokemon are the guardian Pokemon within each region that have received special blessings. Due to their more powerful nature, the people of Hisui have assigned wardens to protect these Pokemon by securing their territories and providing them with food offerings. Each of these Pokemon serves as the final milestone for each of the different areas within the Hisui region. When facing the noble Pokemon, you are being assigned to calm them by throwing bombs at them and occasionally weaken them in a traditional Pokemon fight when the opportunity presents itself. Throughout these battles, they will also attack you, each in a different way unique to the noble Pokemon of the region. I never expected Game Freak to include a Dark Souls-esque game mode in one of their Pokemon games, but here we are. Of course, this is different, but it still is very new to Pokemon and an exciting and thrilling part of the game that makes completing each area all the more fun and meaningful. While the reason for their frenzied state is still somewhat questionable, the noble Pokemon serve as a nice glue to tie your mission to each region, as well as to the characters you meet along the way. While these characters are all charming in their own rights, with certain exceptions, it needs to be stressed that by the end of the game, some of them unfortunately fall rather flat. Additionally, after completing each encounter with the noble Pokemon, the wardens just remain at their sacred areas in case you want a rematch. While this is pretty cool for gameplay purposes, it is a shame to not see them back in their settlement or somewhere else within the region. Similarly, this is the case for other important characters as well. Once they have fulfilled their roles in the story, they just remain stationary at a specific spot for rematches. Despite all of these gripes, it needs to be said that the characters in this game are still some of the most charming in the franchise for me. It's also a welcome introduction that some of them share a strong resemblance to other characters of past Pokemon games as their ancestors. This adds a sense of familiarity to these characters, and this makes characters like, for instance, Aretsu even more interesting and charming. In this game, she's implied to be the ancestor of Mars from Pokemon Pearl and Diamond. Others also say that she is the ancestor of Silver, but let's not get too much into theories right now. While being part of the evil team in Pearl and Diamond, the Mars in this game is friendly and actually cares for the well-being for other people and Pokemon. It's nice to form friendships with characters in this game that resemble others in different Pokemon games that are usually part of the evil teams. Ultimately, both the noble Pokemon and the characters in this game feel extremely refreshing. Last, but definitely not least, we cannot mention all the positives of this game without talking about its music and sound. In terms of music, Legends Arceus presents one of the best in the entire franchise. Pokemon games have always followed the same formula in terms of their music. Each place has their unique music, like towns, routes, caves, forests, and so on. And on top of that, the music would also change to similar yet unique renditions when surfing or riding the bike. Pokemon Legends Arceus does not fall into the same formula, or at least to some degree. Similarly to other mainline Pokemon games, the towns in Legends Arceus have their own unique music. However, with only 3 towns in the game, it is difficult to generalize. The more notable change is that Legends Arceus does not feature routes in a traditional sense. As previously mentioned, the game features open areas instead. Each area comes with a unique set of songs. The set is usually limited to 4 songs. So for instance, the Obsidian Fieldlands has 2 songs unique to that area, which in turn have 2 versions each. However, while exploring the area, each song would play interchangeably. This game takes place in the ancient Sinnoh region, so some of the music is also remastered or reimagined of other songs from Pokémon Diamond and Pearl. For example, the song for Jubilife Village is a new rendition of the song for Jubilife City. Eterna Forest has a reimagined version of the Eterna Forest theme of Pokémon Diamond and Pearl. You get the idea. But it is insane how good these reimagined versions of these already 10 out of 10 classic songs are. Pokémon Legends Arceus came out in 2022, so why does it make me so nostalgic already when I hear these songs? Naturally, it would be way too repetitive if the songs would just play repeatedly, one after another. This is where Legends Arceus pulls a Breath of the Wild, as this game also features a plethora of times where there is simply no music playing. This is where the sound design in the game shines a lot. In moments where no music is playing, the scenery is accompanied by spacious and luscious wind and foliage soundscapes. Additionally, as in previous Pokémon games, you can hear the cries of other wild Pokémon nearby, which definitely adds to the liveliness and vibe of the game. Other than the area music, your adventure will also be greeted with new songs that indicate the time of the day. In other words, this game features songs that play when the time shifts from nighttime to morning or from evening to nighttime. These two songs evoke a feeling of mystery, and especially the morning song evokes a feeling of hopelessness. I mean, I remember hearing this song for the first time, thinking that it's strangely melancholic. You're stranded in this strangely familiar yet foreign world or time, and it is unclear how we can return back home, if at all. There's this strange sadness yet hopefulness this song evokes in me, and it's goddamn beautiful. Alright, enough about this emotional yapping. Have I mentioned that this game also features a goddamn Eurobeat song when fighting the gods of time and space? Yeah, that's right. Not only the calm music in this game goes hard, but the battle songs are also on another level. I mean, you know that the game with a new rendition of the Cynthia battle theme will deliver amazing action music and PTSD as well. Talking about music is obviously very subjective, and you are welcome to disagree with my opinion, but I truly believe that all the songs in this game are 10 out of 10 across the board. Yes, there are a few songs that are better than others, but in general, the soundtrack is definitely one of the best in the franchise. This in combination with the glorious sound effects, like the one for shiny Pokemon and the backstrikes when throwing Pokeballs, should be enough to convince you to play this game at least once with your headphones. You will not regret it, I promise. The only thing that would have improved the audio experience of the game would be if the game also featured voice acting and general chatter in towns, cause man, what is this? At the time of writing the script for this video, I've played Pokémon Legends Arceus for about 585 hours. Of course, I have completed the main story, the side quests, have caught all the Pokémon, have caught all the unknowns, also completed a living dex, and am even still working on a shiny living dex. Currently, I'm still missing about 20 shiny Pokémon, and I occasionally play it whenever I feel like it. In no sense am I a huge shiny hunter, but I have to say that in Legends Arceus it is easy and feels incredibly gratifying. Then again, maybe I have the brain of a magpie and am addicted to the sparkling visuals and the sound when discovering a shiny Pokemon. From me fanboying over this game throughout this video, you should already know that it is one of the best Pokemon games I have played in a long time. I would even go as far as to say that it is one of the best Pokemon games ever released due to its very engaging catching mechanic. Obviously, this is all my personal opinion. Yes, this game has a lot of things and features that could have been improved upon or introduced. However, with all the fun I had playing this for the first time, and also the fun I'm still having when playing it, even if it is only something as mundane as catching shiny Pokemon, this game makes more than up for its shortcomings. Therefore, my final rating for Pokémon Legends Arceus is a strong 8.5 out of 10. I wholeheartedly believe that with the addition of proper voice acting for the characters, a slightly better story and better graphics, this game would have been an easy 10 out of 10. If you are fed up with the formula of the old Pokemon games, but still like the franchise and you miss the novel feelings you got when playing Pokemon for the very first time, then I recommend you give Legends Arceus a shot. However, I can totally understand if the poor graphical and technical state of the game are too much of a downturner. Not everyone is as enchanted by the fun catching mechanic as I am, but I feel like with this game, Game Freak finally tried something new, and with a bit more polishing, this could become a new and improved standard for future Pokemon games. Speaking of future Pokemon games, I've been working on the script for this video for over 2 years. Would you believe it? And to my absolute surprise, during Pokemon Day in February of 2024, they announced the next game in the franchise, namely Pokemon Legends ZA, or Legends Z2A, whatever you want to call it. With as much praise as I have given to its predecessor, you can already imagine how insanely shocked I was to see them continue the Legends series. Once this game is out, we will of course stream the beginning of my adventure over on my Twitch at Cortrex, so feel free to follow. And if you are curious about my first experience in Pokemon Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, you are welcome to watch both on my YouTube channel here as well. This was my first time working on a review retrospective video, but I feel like I wanted to at least try this once. If you like this format, feel free to let me know and I might work on more videos like this in the future. And for all the viewers who made it to the very end of this video, you are awesome and I really do appreciate you. Since a big portion of the video is based on my opinion, I'm curious about yours. So please let me know what you like and dislike about Legends Arceus in the comments below. And with that, I thank you very much for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like on the video since this took ages to write, record and edit, and it shows me that I can do these sorts of videos more often in the future. I wish you all a damn good day or night wherever you are, and I hope I see you in the next video. Bye!